of our leadership series. So this is our 18th edition of our Leadership Conversations series, and my name is Pasi Opio. I'm a Chief Executive in the leadership group in charge of strategy and innovation. We are glad to have with us today Gideon Aswani, who is our guest speaker, and he'll be talking on the topic of data-driven leadership. One thing we try to do as a leadership group is to move the conversation about data from the IT context, or what we call the data center, into the boardroom, so that it's a leadership conversation and not a technological conversation, because that's where we are moving towards. Leaders need to make decisions based on data. I have also our team in this webinar today, and a number of our associates and consultants. And in the background is our team led by Dr. Martin Oduor-Otieno, who's the Executive Director of the Leadership Group. And welcome, everyone. Welcome, team. The Leadership Group, which is hosting you today, is proud to have over 7 years of a very impactful partnership with our clients. We have worked with organizations and individuals in the public sector, private, and non-profit sectors to develop and support leaders. We focus deliberately on areas in areas of coaching and mentorship, governance and board practice, strategy and business advisory, leadership and communication, and culture and change. Because we believe that these are areas of our core strength and competencies. And because in these areas, we have the best opportunity to deliver the highest impact of for our clients. In our 7 years, we have worked with over 85 organizations, over 300 executive coaching clients. We've conducted board evaluations for quite a number of organizations, leadership and board effectiveness trainings, and board governance audits are part of what we do. We've also undertaken a number of high impact strategy projects, and we are greatly indebted to our clients for being part of this journey with us. We're delighted to have you join us for today's webinar. For those who are in Kenya, in spite of what is happening in the background at Bomas of Kenya, we are glad that you spared some time to be in this webinar, as opposed to focusing on the screens and some data that's being released about our elections. So we invite you to be an integral part of our growing alumni community. You can do this by visiting our website and our social media links posted in the chat box. And Kelly should have posted that. You can also download our 2022 second half calendar of training programs in our areas of focus, curated to provide a cross-section of the target market with very insightful learning experiences. You can also reach us directly on phone and email in case you need to discuss any specific needs, program needs that you may have, as we can tailor make any of them for you. We have 4 upcoming programs, and Kelly will post the brochures for these in the chat box. On 30th to 2nd September, we have a transformational leadership program. It's a very popular program that we run, and leaders have found it very, very helpful in changing and their perspective of leadership and ensuring that they apply an approach of leadership that's transformational to not only the organizations, but the people around them. We have a board executive and succession planning training on 26th September. We also have a strategy execution 101 program, 7th October. We realize that as much as many organizations have very good strategies, execution is a big hurdle that they have to overcome to realize the strategic objectives. Then we also have our global leadership program for Africa from 2nd to 4th November. This is a very interesting program that brings together people from different countries, and we have different themes from leadership, and it's a very, very interesting conversation to have, a program to attend. So now please allow me to introduce Gideon Aswani. Gideon will take us through this session. Gideon is a software apps developer, and excuse me if some of the words I'm going to use may sound technical. I think he'll have a chance to demystify some of them. He's a software apps developer. He's a trainer. He's a managing partner at Pathways International Limited. He focuses more on business. He's a data analytics expert and a data strategy consultant. He is also the former head of data and analytics at Nation Media House. If I could mention some of his skills and experiences, he's data analytics with Python. Gideon, you'll have to tell us what Python is, because some of us know Python as a snake. But you seem to know it from in a different perspective from the tech world. He's a data analytics training expert. He's a social analytics expert, chatbot development expert, web, mobile, and desktop apps development, API. He builds, runs, and deploys applications in what he calls containers. And Gideon, just let me stop there so that I don't go technical with your profile, and let you to take it up from there. So welcome, Gideon.
Thank you very much, Percy, and thanks for having me. I'm really grateful to participate in this leadership conversation webinar series. Leaders, I'm really excited to have an opportunity to discuss this very exciting topic on data-driven leadership. So I hope you can see my screen. So
yes,
let's get into the discussion. So I'll start quickly by talking about who Pathways International is. Essentially, we're a business-focused tech and digital transformation company. We do what we call master data management and governance, data strategy formulation and development, data analytics training and consultancy. We're in the space of data science, so all that stuff Percy has been talking about, using specific tools that we use in data science and software development is all we do. I'm not going to focus a lot on that. This is about leadership. At Pathways, we have partners. We are a Microsoft Gold partner. We are a Tableau partner, Infobib. We partner locally with the Strathmore University to deliver data analytics programs, and also Riara University. We are also an AWS partner. All right, so to get started on this very interesting topic, I thought, let me give some perspectives and thoughts on leadership. You may have come across most of this. And of course, with experts like Leadership Group, they've given different views about what leadership is all about. So I just sampled a couple of them just to give context in the discussion we're going to have in the next 25 minutes or so. The reason why I did this, I wanted to interpret data-driven leadership in the context of these perspectives. Some of them are quite superficial, if I may say. But of course, maybe you subscribe or you have some certain persuasion what leadership is all about. But in a nutshell, these are just some of the perspectives that have been broadly shared about what leadership is all about. Now, let's start by defining what data-driven is. Data-driven involves making choices that are anchored in data, analysis, and interpretation. Such choices inherently address three questions: the why of why we're making that decision, and the what is it about that decision, and how do we implement that decision. And it implies a need for a data strategy, and this data strategy usually is subordinate to what we call a corporate or business strategy. So it must never be the other way around. Data strategy must always be aligned to the corporate strategy. So when you're developing a data strategy that will guide, amongst many other things, the leadership practices that we want to have in a business, we begin by, first of all, looking at the information needs that are inherent in what we call a business or corporate strategy. So what is data-driven leadership? To answer this question, I thought about 4 points that I wanted to share at a very high level. And the first point I'd like to put across is that intuition and personal experience and are longer enough, leaders are now expected to seek additional evidence to support their direction. In legacy business systems, whereby we have people who have a lot of experience in terms of leadership, sometimes we fall into the trap of relying on our personal experience to look at challenges that we are dealing with, currently. But what we are saying here is that as a leader, you need to seek additional evidence to support whichever direction you're inspiring your organization or company to go to. We also want to posit that data is an important check against what we call confirmation bias. Past successes can lead to wrong assumptions, especially with the phenomenon of confirmation bias comes in. So you look at everything from a given perspective, and you try to confirm what your feelings or nuances or hunches are. Data-driven leaders recognize that data connects, data drives accountability, and data can be quantified. So these are just some of the things that you want to think about when you're thinking about data-driven leadership. And finally, data-driven leadership respects the value and necessity of data for connecting the business to customers, products, for driving measurement and accountability, and for guiding prioritization and resource allocation. So at a very high level, this is how it impacts the various things that you do as a leader. It boils down to the need to connect with your customers and products, drive measurement and accountability, and guide the prioritization and resource allocation within your organizations. I would like to invite you to think about what data-driven in relation to being data-informed is all about. Now, to look at the difference between the two, I will start by asking the first questions. Do you make decisions in a way you wouldn't otherwise because of what data tells you? I'll repeat that question. Do you make decisions in a way you wouldn't otherwise because of what data tells you? Being data-driven requires continually listening to the evidence and asking additional questions. What you'll find sometimes is that the answers to these questions will confirm your hypothesis, but in other cases, they may surprise you. If you really find yourself making decisions that are different from your original hunch, you are likely using data to superficially confirm your prior viewpoints. And this is what we're referring to before there as a confirmation bias. Although there are some cases when you have to make decisions based on intuition and ignore the data, there should also be cases where the data overrides your initial opinion. And this is And this is why we are saying sometimes you'll get surprised by what data tells you in comparison to what you know. Now, second question, do you use data selectively, only in cases where it supports your arguments? Think about it. Are we guilty of that? You could have well-established expectations that decisions are supported with data. And although this can be a powerful cultural norm, it can also create an incentive to use data primarily as a rhetorical tool to justify something you are planning to do. So this is working from the answer in a very simple way. In this case, data is used to selectively support a particular viewpoint or argument rather than as a means for understanding the truth. It is better to use data to understand what's happening and not to make a point. So this is a case of selectively using data where it supports your argument. Now, regardless of whether you are data-driven or data-informed, data should be viewed as a starting point for further exploration rather than as an endpoint. So rather than just viewing the dashboard and choosing the case, ask yourself, what does this data really mean? What should we be doing about it? If as a business leader, you see data as a means for investigation, you'll derive the greatest benefit from it all. So we get bombarded with a lot of data and we have our own interpretation of what it means. But what we are suggesting here is that you should look at data as a means for investigation. And once you start supporting data as a means for investigation, then chances of deriving greatest benefit from it are going to be very, very high. So think about whether you're data-driven or you're being data-informed. So these will provoke you into probably, getting on the correct path in terms of providing what we call data-driven leadership. I would like to look at board-level leadership and what it entails in the context of being data-driven. At board level, the CEO and the board define vision, mission, broad goals, and competitive differentiators and values. If you recall the 3 questions that I put on earlier, collectively, this is the why of the corporate business strategy question. So board level focuses mostly on why do we exist as a business, on why do we need to do certain things. The board also has the responsibility for oversight and supervision and regulatory compliance. Now, in terms of oversight, the board has to make certain decisions, and we want to look at what sort of frameworks do they use to make these decisions. Are they data-driven, or are they data-informed, or do they rely on evidence to make those particular decisions? At C-suite, the business develops what we call the business strategy. And this includes things like products, services, and decide on target markets. They set also key performance indicators. This is what we are calling here the what and how of the decision. So what is it we want to do? And how are we going to do that? Remember, the board and CEO have defined the why. So the CEO with the C-suite team, they have to define the what and how. And you will see how data comes in terms of defining or focusing that picture to see what the what and the how is all about. Now, let's look at board level data-driven decisions. At board level, as we've observed, the board defines the vision, the mission, and the broad goals and competitive differentiators and values. Some interesting points to ponder at board level. How can board decisions impact brand equity and trust? Is there a connection with data or decision frameworks that are founded on data in terms of impacting brand equity and trust? Can board decisions generate some social capital? How do we know that? Or do we do it just because it seems to be the most fashionable thing at corporate level, that we have to be associated with some kind of social initiative? What about unique positioning? How do boards decide on how to uniquely position their organizations? What information do boards require for decision making? And how do boards obtain this information? If you think deeply about this, information is a derivative of data. So you start with data, then you do what we call analytic enrichment. And once you slice, dice, and sort out the data, you're able to come up with what we call correlations, patterns, insights. And hopefully from these insights that you derive from the data, you're able to reach decision points. So at board level, we do require a decision framework that is anchored in data. I would like to probably propose what I call a case for board level data strategy. In practice, we've seen that the C-suite rather develops what we call the business strategy and the data or digital strategy. This mainly focuses on answering the what and how. Why we have seen is the focus of board level. At C-suite level, a data strategy is a complement to an integral part of the business strategy. And I would like to emphasize the term complement. When you have a data strategy that does not complement the business strategy, then something is wrong. I think it's time to hit a reset button and rethink about both the business strategy and the data strategy. And in fact, what you will find most times is that when there's a conflict between the two, technology tends to drive the business as opposed to the other side, where technology should actually be aligned to the business requirements. Data-driven practices are subordinate to these two. So you must get your business strategy correct, and your data strategy must be aligned to the business strategy. And what emerges from there is that you develop a set of practices that are data-driven and must always be subordinate to these two and not the other way around. At C-suite level, a coherent data strategy that strikes a balance between what we call defensive data management, and this we're talking about security and governance, and an offensive data management, such as predictive analytics, is required. So data-driven leaders must develop competencies, capacities, and know-how to develop a coherent data strategy. And at a much micro level, when we define what defensive data is all about, management, and offensive data management is all about, then we start to see why it's very, very important that you get your data strategy correct. Again, this is the business of leaders. Leaders sometimes are guilty of sometimes delegating this to ICT within the organization. And we tend to think that everything to do with data and technology is ICT. But I'm putting it to you that this is a business of leaders, and they must think through what the business is all about and how they can leverage the power of data to get it correct. Now, some questions to reflect on. Do boards need a board level data strategy as a complement to an integral part of the corporate strategy? So similarly at C-suite level, we are saying we need a strategy, data strategy, that is a complement to the business strategy. So when the board is doing its business, do they also need a similar board level data strategy? Probably the answer is yes. I'm not saying anything prescriptive here, but we're suggesting probably that can help in terms of decision-making at board level. Do data-driven leadership practices at board level then become subordinate to the board level strategy? Yes, we do require data-driven leadership practices at board level. How do we develop this? I think, again, I would say it is the business of leaders to see how this can actually be developed and put in place. I would like to look at the situation in terms of data-driven leadership insofar as organizations are concerned. And I would like to draw onto a research that was done by Harvard Business Review Analytics Services. And it found that 3/4 of organizations do not have a leadership that supports a data-driven culture or nurtures analytics-led innovation. Think about this and the organizations that you lead. Do you have a leadership that supports a data-driven culture or nurtures analytics-led innovation? The research also found that nearly 1/4 of the respondents say that their company culture tends to limit access to information. And 1/5 of the respondents think that organizational structure impedes use of analyzed data. So if we focus a little bit more on what that says, is that sometimes organizational culture is a huge impediment to implementing data-driven practices within an organization. So culture, and a lot of organizations like to pride themselves in a strong culture in doing this and doing that. We're seeing that it can be an impediment if it's not managed properly. What about the whole concept of the structure that impedes use of analyzed data? Reflect upon the situation in your organizations, and probably you may want to start looking at whether your organizational structure supports use of analyzed data. Now, executives also reported that adoption of analytics is at standstill. They have yet to realize the long-term benefits of their investments. And I think this is quite typical here. For the last 5 years, we've heard about big data, we've heard about data science, we've heard about AI, and we see what happens with large technology companies, and businesses are changing. So what you have seen in the last 5 years, some positions have emerged that were never there before. We've seen the proliferation of positions like Chief Data Officer. We've heard about analytic initiatives. We've heard about companies forming data and analytics centers and so on and so forth. But what we are seeing here is that companies are yet to realize long-term benefits of these investments. According to Vantage Partners, the biggest hindrance to increasing adoption of analytics is the inability to build a data-driven culture through the organization. So you may invest in all this training, technology, and so on and so forth. But I think one key cog that probably we do not pay attention to is the whole aspect of the culture of the organization. And I think this is the most difficult aspect to influence. I'd like to speak about how we can redefine being data-driven. And a lot of organizations are guilty of this. There is a misconception that being data-driven solely means using technology, often in the form of charts, dashboards, and visualization tools. So we've seen a lot of organizations with dashboards. We've seen automation of reporting. We've seen a lot of guys going out for training and so on and so forth. And businesses have invested disproportionate sums of resources in enrolling employees in analytics classes, data science certifications, teaching people how to query databases. The new Vantage Partners report shows that this clearly hasn't worked. Again, think about the various organizations where you come from. Have you sent your staff to these trainings? And what has been the impact? Are you firmly on the road to digital transformation? Do you support data-driven practices? Again, the jury is out there. Now, the principal challenge to becoming data-driven lies with the people, businesses, business processes, and culture. What you will see a recurring theme here is culture. And leaders need to address culture in order to successfully take on the challenge of being data-driven. As my last slide, I would like to give a top-down approach to data-driven sort of a success, if you like. In today's quickly changing business environment, the entire company must make the shift to becoming more analytical, and it is up to the executives to lead the way. Leaders, it's really up to you. It's not up to the ICT department. It's not up to the technology guys in there. It is up to you as leaders to lead the way. There is a very strong case for having a data leader in the C-suite. This can help to foster and accelerate a culture of data-driven iteration, rapid testing, and failure, making data accessible to everyone in the company, even frontline employees. We like to call this democratization of data. So we say innovation is not an ICT-led thing. Innovation happens right across the organization. And when you make data accessible to everyone in the organization, then we democratize innovation. The onus is on executives to champion data-driven initiatives, infuse analytics in the business workflows, so everyone can use actionable intelligence. And I would like to emphasize everyone in the organization can use actionable intelligence, and there must be examples of data-driven cultures to the rest of the company. So as leaders, the onus is on you. So I think that's my last slide. And I would like to thank you very much for your audience. I think at this point, I'll hand it back to Percy, so I probably can do some question and answer session. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Gideon. Let's give Gideon a clap. A round of applause for that. And we now move post you may post your answer in the chat or raise your hand and I'll allow you to speak. And as we prepare to ask our questions, Gideon, one question I'd like to ask you is, you've mentioned that data-driven leadership is not a technology-driven initiative, but the business leaders. What, in a nutshell, would be the building blocks in the pathway to adopting a data-driven leadership approach in an organization? What should I do as a leader or an organization to make sure that happens?
Thank you very much, Percy. In our experience, what we found out, some of the challenges we've seen when we engage with customers, there generally tends to be some good measure of understanding at a vice president level and levels below in terms of understanding what data can do for the business. And we find a very good appreciation, but I wouldn't say the same at probably C-level. We probably haven't had much interaction at board level. But my thinking is, like I mentioned in this particular slide, it has to be a top-down approach. So the board has to sit down and determine really what they want to do. And what we've seen happening is that sometimes this calls for what we call an awareness training at board level, whereby you get some thought-provoking sort of training in terms of how your business model can be flipped on its head by just looking at the opportunities presented by data. And once that provocation is done at board level, it becomes a lot more easier for the board to define the why of what we want to do. And of course, when this trickles down to the C-level, the C-level then translates that into the what and how. That approach tends to work very much. And we can draw examples to technology companies like Amazon, Meta, and even Google. These things happen at the very top level, and then they create an environment that supports the thinking at the very top level of the organization. So Percy, it boils down to awareness creation and change at the leadership level in terms of thinking, where past or legacy business systems cannot take you forward in a data crazy sort of business environment.
Okay, thank you, Gideon. I can see Kenon's hand is up. Kenon, you can unmute your microphone and ask a question.
Thank you very much, Percy, and the wonderful presentation that you've gotten. I appreciate that. Mine is a question around data. I've had a chance to interact with data for a while, and I found one of the biggest challenges is capturing the data in the first place. Whether from a corporate perspective or personal perspective, that, of course, there's a garbage in, garbage out. So the garbage in bit, the ability to capture data accurately. I don't know what proposals of what solutions have been put out there to enable people and companies capture the data very accurately, because then that is a starting point. Maybe before I drop off, just a thought to share that I saw on a WhatsApp group. Currently, we have the elections going on, and we know all the forms have been uploaded somewhere. So the challenge is, how do we input all that data in whatever, whether Excel or any other way, to get information? I'm just creating a practical example of the question I'm asking. How can we get solutions around data entry in the first place? Thank you.
Thank you, Kenon. I'll give an attempt to answer the questions that you've asked. The first one is the accuracy of data that organizations collect. First of all, before you collect data, you must be data aware. We come across many customers who like to do or implement various use cases. Some would like to implement predictive models that can predict things like customer churn, that can predict all manner of things about their customers and their businesses. But when we look at the quality of data, depth in terms of breadth and relevance of the data they do have, we actually find out that they do not have sufficient data to implement the use cases that they do have. Why is this the case? This is the case because data awareness is very weak. And I'll give you an example. A lot of organizations have mobile applications. A lot of organizations have web portals whereby your customers actually interact with your business through these portals. Now, as long as we stop viewing these particular portals as windows where our customers can come and probably do a couple of things, and we start viewing them as what we call customer touch points, and we become very interested in everything that our customers are doing on our mobile applications, websites, and all other touch points that we do have, then we start to think, let's collect all the information that a customer leaves on our website or our mobile application. What do we mean by this? From a technology perspective, we can implement what we call event listeners. So if I click on a link on a website, that information is collected. If I like something, my social actions, that information is collected. If I come and go without doing anything, that information is collected. So we start to build a lot of very rich data about customer behavior when they interact with our businesses on the various touch points that we've created. Now, if you have a very well-defined data strategy that backs your business, then you start to see what kind of data that you need to collect. So suddenly, your data strategy will point you to the fact that you need to pay a lot of attention to what your customers are doing on social platforms. You need to pay attention to what your customers are doing on your mobile applications, on your websites, or you need to pay attention to other places that your customers go to that you do not have access to. So then suddenly you start to see the span and width of the data that you're interested in collecting starts to become very, very clear. And you start to build a rich data sets rather that you've collected of relevant customer behavior or business partners behavior when they're dealing with your business. Number two, the issue of IBC portal and why probably we are seeing a very slow sort of a consumption of what is happening there. I think form and format is very, very important. When you collect data, you must think about what you want to do with this data. Do you want to share it with external publics? And what are the most appropriate and easy techniques that you can actually share data with the publics? If you look at uploading images to a portal, it becomes a lot more difficult for the public to interact because you've got to physically download these pages and start a manual process of actually extracting the numbers and adding. But if you look at the concept of how what we call APIs or application programming interfaces, how they work, the format of the data that is stored in portals is searchable and extractable in a very, very quick and fast manner. And all you have to do, you don't have to download images. If I want, for example, specific things like, for example, number of votes garnered by a certain candidate, I can extract that within no time, and I can create an application that actually just aggregates all the data. And you can actually get these things done within a matter of minutes, if not probably seconds, depending on how fast your computers are. So the problem there really, Canon, is all about the format in which this data is presented on these websites and portals. I can see Martin's hand is up.
Yes, thank you, Gideon. Martin?
Yeah.
Thanks a lot, Gideon, for sharing the insights that you have shared with us this morning. I want to kind of ask a question, tongue in cheek in a way, to kind of go back to the basics around the business case for data-driven leadership. So you talked about the role of the board and board awareness, etc. But many organizations will tell you that we've been around and we've survived this long, leading our organizations the way we do, and without this concept of data-driven leadership. And so, in a simple way, how would you persuade organizations, and what kind of examples can you give us that bring this thing home? So it's not a concept sitting out there in the cloud, but it's something that that we can actually interact with. So any practical examples of successful organizations who are using this approach today and the results that is coming out of that. And maybe from your own experience in the past. So how do we then demystify this whole thing and sort of say, this is the business case, forget about history and what you've been doing, but these are the benefits of using data-driven leadership today. Thanks, Gideon.
Thanks, Martin, for bringing that up. Actually, I can confirm that is one of the biggest sort of pushbacks we experience when we deal with mature organizations that have had legacy businesses that have been very successful based on approaches and models that have worked maybe up to this point in time. And when I talk about culture within organization being an impediment, this is exactly what I'm talking about. So it is very difficult sometimes to argue with a business that's showing you so far we are doing so well, so why should we change? Now, an example of an organization that is utilizing data very well at the moment and is doing very, very interesting things. What we found out is that organizations that have been founded in the last maximum 10 years, they tend to really soak up or take up the whole concept of being data-driven, very fast, and they drive very rapid sort of progress. I'll give one example. A customer that we are working with at the moment, I will not mention the name, but this is a company that's been around maybe for around 5 years at the moment. What they do, these guys, they run posho mills, funny enough. They've had a very successful business in Tanzania whereby they provide what you call nutrients in terms of a fortified maize flour that their posho mills are able to inject these nutrients into the flour as it is milled by the milling machines. And these milling machines are quite interesting because what they've done is that they're using what we call IoT technology to monitor quite a number of parameters as the milling process goes on. So they're able to collect, for example, the volumes and quantities of nutrients that they're adding to the flour mills that they're selling to, locals, and this is rural Tanzania. They're able to monitor things like performance of the equipment. They're able to monitor volumes that they're generating. And further to that, they've got mobile applications that are able to monitor the impact that they're having on the local communities in terms of, number one, the well-being of especially children who are benefiting from consumption of these fortified foods. the success in terms of the customers who are actually buying the meal, the flour, and are reselling it, because of mobile applications, they're able to see uptake, and they're able to see how the stocks are moving and so on and so forth. And they collect a host of other many data points that they monitor just to drive their businesses forward. So all this data is aggregated and analyzed and shared from an AWS cloud perspective. And the last numbers we're looking at, they were able to impact about 700,000 rural families in Tanzania. And the model has been very, very successful. What they've done, they've set up shop in Kenya at the moment. They have an office somewhere in Gigiri, and they want to replicate the success of what they have seen their business doing in Tanzania, primarily built on being able to collect data about the impact of what they're doing in the market, the impact of what their foods are doing to the local populations, and number three, even monitoring performance of the equipment that they're using in there, and a host of other measures that they're picking up. So this is a startup, like I said, probably about 5 years old today, or slightly more. And we are seeing them driving a lot of change in that. There's another one here in what we call the food technology space. They basically created what we call a platform that connects producers of foodstuffs and sellers, whereby they've recruited a host of farmers who are supplying them with a couple of farm inputs. And they've also recruited a huge group of resellers who are using these platforms to buy. So they determine the producer prices, and they also determine what the selling price will be. And they collect a lot of data about what is happening in this particular platform. So Martin, this is just an example of some of the things that are happening. As for well-entrenched organization, this is very difficult to tell because they're still struggling with that aspect. They have successful systems, and they have to migrate into this data environment. So that transition sometimes takes a little bit of time.
Thank you, Gideon.
Yeah.
Right, thank you. Thank you, Gideon. I couldn't help hearing you mention culture quite a number of times. What is the kind of culture that an organization needs to adopt to be able to adopt the digital-driven leadership approach?
Yes, if you look at this, the screen in front of you at the moment, we talked about acceleration of a culture that promotes rapid testing and failure. So we must internalize the fact that some of these initiatives are not going to work. And we must accommodate situations whereby we spend money and sometimes we don't get an output out of that. Number two, we must use data to determine the sort of competencies and skills that we need to recruit into an organization. We come across a lot of organizations that want to hire people with JavaScript, people with Python, people with C++, people with R, and so on and so forth. You question a little bit more, why do you want someone who has those particular skills? You don't find very convincing responses. So it seems organizations are copying from each other. And we see right now there's something we call staff augmentation that we run on behalf of companies. So we approach big organizations and say, look, you may have a need for someone with a certain skill set. So instead of investing resources in terms of recruiting this particular person, and the case you have for them probably is only 6 months, why don't you consider probably outsourcing or rather sourcing this particular skill from an environment whereby it already exists, so you only get it for the duration that you do want. So part of the cultural change that you need to have in an organization, Percy, is first of all, promoting the idea of rapid testing and failure. Number two, HR must come in from a very strategic perspective, whereby they must understand the resource requirement that is embedded in the data strategy. And then they must start recruiting based on what the business actually require as specified in the data strategy. So those are some of the things that I can say need to change from a culture perspective. And of course, at top leadership level, we need to stop thinking about past successes and get out of what we're calling confirmation bias before.
All right, thank you very much, Gideon. And unfortunately, we've run out of time, but for the rest of the audience, please feel free to reach out to us. The journey, as Gideon has stated, of moving a data-driven strategy from a technology-led perspective to a business-led perspective, it's not a journey that happens overnight or as an event. It's a whole process that, and the leadership group is focusing a lot on this approach and trying to get our leaders all the way from the board to C-suite to appreciate data and the data-driven decision-making as a business-led approach as opposed to a technology-led approach. And only tech will come in to support. And thank you very much, Gideon, for the presentation and responding to our questions. Kelly has posted links to a link for you to register for our next webinar. We hold a webinar every month, so please register and we'll reach out to you and let you know what we'll focus on and the dates for the next webinar. So thank you very much, everyone. Remember to register for our programs. Our Transformation Leadership Program comes up on 30th to 2nd of September. So please register for that. It's a really, really good program that's very, very exciting, and leaders have found it very, very helpful. So thank you, and may you all have a great day today. And for Kenyans, yes?
No, thank you very much, Pasi.
All right. Yeah, and for those who are waiting for the election results, let's wait for it patiently. And remember that life goes on beyond the elections. Thank you very much, and we look forward to meeting you again in our next webinar and in the Transformational Leadership Program coming up at the end of this month.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Pasi. Thanks, everybody.